In this video, I will continue working on this 1948 Chevy pickup truck, where I will primarily be working on the frame, and I'm really going to focus on the back side of the frame. All of the rear suspension will get ripped out. Then I will fabricate my own C-notch. I will get the frame prepped, and that C-notch will get burnt in and also boxed in. And I will show the whole process step by step. Guys, sorry for no video for a while. There was actually a good reason for it. Somewhat recently, I was involved in an accident. I took my 4-year-old and my dog for a walk around the neighborhood, and right out there by that yellow sign is where we were when we were coming back, and some idiot in the car came around the corner a little too fast, and he took the corner a little too wide, and long story short, he ended up hitting me. He hit me so hard that I ended up flying up in the air, and then I came crashing back down to the ground. I got banged up pretty bad, but thankfully neither the kid nor the dog got hurt. And per doctor's orders, I had to take it easy for a while. And once I got better, I went on a vacation. So now, since I'm healed and rested, let's get back to work. In last video, I kind of gave you a breakdown of what I had as far as the parts and a little history behind the truck that I'm using. But in this video, we're actually going to get some work done on this frame. This particular frame came out of a late 80s, I'd say 88, 89, or maybe 1990 Chevy S-10. So the perfect combination to make this project work. I had to find a frame that came out of a Chevy S-10 truck with a standard cab and a long bed. With that combination, that would put our Chevy S-10 wheelbase only off by ½ inch away from the original wheelbase of the old school truck. Previous owner of this frame actually had, I think, a 1950 or a 51 Chevy body on it. But what the previous owner did was he fabricated his own quote-unquote custom mounts to mount the body onto this frame. And if you look, these things are crude. Just look at these welds. They're beautiful, aren't they? Basically, all of this stuff is getting hacked off, and I have a much better solution of how I'm going to mount the body onto this frame. Designing and fabricating a good body mount system is no easy task, so I decided to skip this step, and I went ahead and bought a kit from Code 504. It's a good, reputable company, so I know that this kit will make my truck build that much quicker and easier. So I'm going to modify this frame in several different places, but the very first thing to do is I have no idea what the history of this frame is, meaning I don't know if the truck that this frame was part of in the past was involved in any kind of accident. So the very least that I'm gonna do is I want to check the diagonals on the frame to make sure that this frame is not tweaked in any way. And this is just a quick insurance before I do all the work and then I set the body down on this frame and find out that this thing is bent. I'm gonna use that hole right there and also a corresponding hole on the other side to take my measurements from. So I'm just gonna run the tape to a similar hole in the front because I got another hole like that on the other side. All right, so I'm gonna run it and let's see. So we are just 2 millimeters shy of 223 centimeters. Now I'm going to hook onto the opposite side. And we are a couple millimeters shy of 223 centimeters. So that's good. Another good thing to look at is you want to look at both front and rear horns, and a thing you want to look out for is any kind of a hammer blow marks anywhere, you know, in the front, because if there was any frame damage and the chains were used to pull on a frame, a lot of times the hammer is also used to help to put metal back into place, and I don't see any hammer marks or chain marks anywhere on the front or a rear part of the frame, which is a huge plus because I really would not want to start out with a tweaked frame, and that would cause me to run into a lot of problems down the road. So I want to be able to lower this truck, and we do have some 3-inch drop blocks back here, but I'm not going to use them. In fact, I'm not even going to use these leaf springs. or this rear end. The rear end I'm going to use is this one right here. It's a Ford 8.8 inch rear that came out of a late 90s Ford Explorer. So the reasons I'm going to be using this rear end over that one is because since we are going to be running a V8 engine, I want our rear end to be able to take that abuse and not snap under pressure. Also, this new rear end does have a limited slip differential inside, and this rear end is already set up for disc brakes. And on the original, we got rear drums. So as I mentioned, I want to get this truck to be able to get down pretty low. So instead of the leaf springs, we're actually going to have airbags. And also to be able to get this thing really low, I'm going to put a C-notch into this frame. I don't want to do the crazy big old C-notch because I don't want to modify the floor of the bed in any way. So instead, I will do a mini C-notch where I will cut into the frame and I will still retain the original top of the frame. And once again, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So instead of having to design my own C-notch, I will go ahead and try to recreate something that's already been done before and save some money in the process. So in order to get the C-notch going, I have to get the frame ready first. And what I mean by that is I got to get rid of these axle bump stops. This bump stop really limits a lot of the axle's upward travel. Since I am working on one rail at a time, I'm going to go ahead and take this rail and I'll find the flattest spot. So if I'm looking on that side, it's flat, and then it just kind of starts going up a hill a little bit right here. So this right here would be the flattest spot on the whole frame. I want to make sure that my frame is level side to side. And right now it looks like the rear of the truck is still a little too low, so I'm going to have to jack it up a little more. Now with the rear up in the air, the frame is perfectly level. So now I got to kind of figure out where approximate center of the axle is, set the level on it, bring it up, make sure we're level, and draw the line on the frame that projects the center of our axle. Now this line represents the center of our notch. Most of the C-notches that I see online give you 2 1/4 inch spacing from the bottom of the frame and 2 1/4 inches up. And since I am going to be using a 1/4 inch piece of steel to make my C out of, 2 1/4 plus 1/4 makes it 2 1/2. So I basically have to go 2 1/2 inches from the bottom of the frame up to the top where the C-notch will end. So now since this frame rail is level and I know where 2 1/2 inch mark is, I'll put my level up to it, make sure that my bubble is level, and then I'll draw out a line. So I use a couple of pieces of a flat bar to basically make a rough mock-up of the finished product. So if we put it up to our line, this is basically what we're going to get. That's going to be our cutout in the frame. So fully aired out, if the axle was sitting basically on the frame, I would still have about 1/2 inch of a gap on either side of the axle. So to go over it, our axle tube is 3 1/4 inches in diameter. I made this gap to be about 3 inches, and our angles right here are at about 60 degrees out. As far as I can tell, this is closely represents all of these other mini C-notches that I've seen online, so something like this should work. This rear end is kind of getting in the way, so since this thing's gonna come out anyways, I guess right now is as good time as ever to yank it. Now it's time to actually make the C-notch. If you look at the frame, we got some areas that are more narrow on the sides and some areas are a little wider. So the outside of the frame is going to be nice and straight. The inside, since this frame is not boxed in, will have a varying width. So let's measure it out. At the widest point, our frame is 3.5 inches wide. The material I'm using for C-notch is also 3.5 inches wide. Since I know that this is going to be a basic shape for my C-notch, I will go ahead and mimic this shape with this plate. So the very top of my opening is going to be 3 inches wide. So I'm going to go ahead and mark 3 inches. And then sides don't really matter because at some point I'm going to be trimming off the edges. Now I draw a straight line. Double check, 3 inches, perfect. I don't have a metal brake or any kind of a metal bender that would be able to bend a 1/4 inch thick piece of metal such as this one, so I'm gonna have to get a little creative. Here I'm just using a regular cutoff wheel, but I am not cutting all the way through the metal. So I made my cuts a little more than a halfway, so about 2/3 of the way through. This is another little template that I just drew out. If I put my square right to the very beginning where that line begins, if you follow the line all the way through, it comes through right through the 60-degree mark. Now I'm just going to put this plate in the vise and make our bend along that line. I got to come up just a little more. Блять. This one side is exactly along 60-degree mark. Unfortunately, I did lose my other piece. It just busted out, but that's okay. I'll be able to tack this on because I'll be welding up these seams anyways, so it'll be fine. Since I am going to be doing quite a bit of fabrication on this project, that will require me to do a fair amount of welding. And if you've seen my older videos, most of the welding that I do is usually takes place right here on the ground, and that's not ideal. So I went out and picked me up a cheap welding table. Now I just got to throw this thing together. And Harbor Freight strikes again. So all in all, this table is cool. It will for sure serve its purpose, but the only complaint is there's a guide rail that bolts onto this side, and there's also supposed to be a long guide rail that goes on the front or the back of the table, and it's not in a box. I'm missing it, so I'm gonna have to acquire that later, but all in all, this table is cool. It'll do. So let me double check to make sure nothing's moved, and this side is perfectly at 60 and the other side is, perfectly at 60 as well. And since one of the sides broke off, I decided to weld in the inside joint, just to give the notch that much more strength. All right, looking good. I got the C-notch clamped in place. So now the top of the C-notch is lined up with the line that corresponds with a 2.5 inch point from the bottom up. And also the center of a C-notch, which I marked with that line right there, corresponds with our vertical axle line. So now with everything in place, I can trace out our cut lines. Also, I want the bottom of a C-notch to come down about 1/4 of an inch past the lowest point of the frame. So I'll go ahead and mark it right in that spot. This is my 1/4 inch below the frame line. I'll go ahead and draw a straight line. Same thing on the other side. The very last thing I want to do before I cut into the frame is, once I make that cut, I'm going to weaken this part of the frame, so the back half of the frame with all of the weight behind it may sag a little bit. And just to prevent that from happening, I put this jack stand here, and there's some drag on this little metal shim. This way we got the back half of this frame supported, so this way all of the geometry will stay the same and nothing will move. After doing a little bit of cleanup with a grinder on both sides, this is what we got, and this thing fits like a glove. So the next step would be for me to get this all tacked in, but before I do that, I want to make sure that this C-notch is level. So in order for me to figure out whether I'm level or not in here, first thing I got to do is I got to make sure that both of the frame rails are actually level to each other. So I got my level out here, and the bubble is not in the center. So that means I gotta jack up that side of the frame. Alrighty, so the frame is level, and I got our C-notch situated in here, just being held in by some welding magnets. Got a 1/4 inch lip stick out, just something for the welds to bite into. And if I put this level in here, the C-notch is level. So now it's time to get this thing tacked in place. Most of the C-notches that I've seen online would have a boxing plate with a length of 14 inches, and I have it marked out here. So it's basically gonna run from there to there. That's our 14 inches. So now I'm gonna make a template for that boxing plate. So in order for me to design the template that's gonna go in here, I have to first take some measurements. And let's see, my measurement here is about 3 3/4 of an inch. Here it's a little over 4 inches, but since I'm making my template 14 inches long, right here on my 14-inch mark, or my 0 mark, I am right at 5 inches. So I know this is going to be the biggest gap I got, so my whole template is going to start out at 5 inches tall. And after a bit of trimming, I think it turned out pretty good. Guys, this thing fits just like a glove. Really nice and tight. I'm telling you, if you guys doing any sort of fabrication and you don't have a plasma cutter, do yourself a favor and just get one. It'll save you so much time and frustration. Since this area is about to get covered up with this boxing plate, I went ahead and put down some primer on all of the bare metal inside. But since I am still going to be doing some welding up in here, I wanted to make sure that I was using some weld-through primer. I went ahead and sprayed it with some black primer just to keep the rust away. And now I'm going to repeat the process on the other side. And once again, the frame rail that's being worked on gets leveled out first. On our finished side, if I measure from the very end of the frame rail to the very center of our C-notch, I get exactly 42 inches. So I'm going to transfer that measurement onto this side. Put a vertical line through that area. Quickly fabricate another C-notch plate. Get it scribed in and get to cutting. This time, to keep the dust down and also to speed up the workflow, I'm going to use my plasma cutter to cut into the frame. And looking beautiful. In the next video, we will totally refurbish the front suspension and get it ready for airbags, so make sure to tune in for that. In the meanwhile, thank you for watching, sharing, and smashing that like button, and I'll be seeing you here in the next video real soon.